Sir, good morning, sir, and thank you for agreeing to give an interview for the Dalit camera. Sir, this interview was basically focusing on the Haryana rape and those kinds, which awakened us to do something, data or some discussion to happen on this whole area, because rape is not one particular thing. So therefore, in that context, we were looking for you to take an interview. We were one of the experts in Foucault also. No, it is true actually. Anyway, so I'll go to the question which you gave me. How do you understand sexuality in our contemporary context?
My feeling is, when we think of sexuality in our contemporary context, there are many different registers one must think about, right? One of them is the dominant erotic image of women on television, in cinema, as not only objects but also speaking, beckoning subjects of sexual attraction. And which man does not like to see eye candy as it were? Very common. And it's almost taken for granted that
Little louder.
and it's also taken for granted that today there's a kind of taken for grantedness that this eye candy is an okay function. It's good. And in fact, you have even men who are arm candy, not eye candy. On the one hand, right? Image. On the other hand, there's also a changing way in which femininity is used in the work context, in the everyday lives, how people actually see each other. It is about women going off to work. It is about being a docile workforce. It is about providing an element of color and attractiveness to the workplace, which was once a very drab, suit-oriented or shirt and pants-oriented workplace. Suddenly, saris, their color, everything, things are changing. All this is clearly an outcome of the history of the women's movement in different ways. Adoptions of some of the women's movement's propositions, reactions against them, changes in the way women imagine themselves in relation to what the women's movement proposes. So there are many such changes which have occurred. So today when you talk about woman as a sexual object, it is not the same as feminists who spoke of women as a sexual object in the 1970s. There's a difference. Because there's an assertion on the part of women who've taken this notion of being a sexual object, used it in a certain way and redeployed it in different ways. So even actresses today, Katrina Kaif, who would use their sexuality in visual images are not the same as, for example, Marilyn Monroe in the earlier scheme of thing, or who else? Madhubala. They're not functioning as eye candy. On the one hand, somebody like Katrina Kaif is bolder, more explicit, saying it straight in your face. In that, whatever feminism says, this is not going to affect the fact that I'm a woman, but I am physically available on the screen. Which is very different from an earlier form in which it was portrayed. So So on the one hand, you have this portrayal of.
How was the earlier form?
The earlier form was much more subdued. If you look at the film song, for instance,
Earlier film song.
the earlier film song versus now, the heroine's film song would always be, or the heroine or the main female figure's film song, would be something where she is demure. And sexuality is veiled in a glance, in the movement of clothes, in the sudden flash of the body somewhere. So that's that. It's veiled. Whereas in today's kind of portrayal, it is there's surplus of the body.
Okay.
Sure. But that surplus of a body is accompanied by a boldness of family. Right? It is not, for example, in an item number, Vipasha Basu will show her body in the middle of 100 men who are leching after her. And it is shown in that context. And there seems to be no clear self-consciousness of being oppressed in that situation, rather than as being in command of the situation on the part of the woman who is showing herself on the screen. Look at off-screen interviews of any of these people. There is no sense of, I am being oppressed or used. Now the thing is that kind of an image of a woman on the screen is one of the conditions with which women encounter the streets. When you travel, when a woman travels or walks on the road, you are walking on the road in a manner which is judged by the iconic woman on the screen, who is seen for at least 2 to 3 hours a day by men when they watch it on the screen. So you're constantly, there's a process of normativity. That is, that woman on the screen is a norm of beauty. And you are measured against the norm. At the same time, looking at a woman for her body itself becomes an established way of looking at a woman in general. This is an old insight to come in, that for men it is ideas that count, for women it is their body that counts. Today there's a reassertion of that, with often in many cases the woman actually taking a willing position, especially in cinema etc., without it necessarily meaning that the women are less smart. There are women who are like that and are very smart. So there's that change in there's a reconfiguration of how one looks at gender in this process. So I think that is the difference, that on the one hand you have this identity of sexual attraction in terms of a particular person on the screen. On the other hand, there's also a reconfiguration of the space of the public in terms of sexuality. There are many things occur in this reconfiguration, where when the woman walking in the street today, after 9 p.m., is not necessarily identical to the woman who was walking after 9 p.m. on the street in the 60s or 70s. There's an added danger, there's also an added freedom, and there's also a change in the presuppositions of the people who see her walking on the street. So, not all women who walk on the streets at night are women inviting rape. And yet when a rape does occur, it falls back to that model in the discussion of the law. There's something which is changing here to us to think about. So in this retransformation of the ground, there are two things which happen. One is, at some level there's an encouragement, I would think, for men to expect women to dress according to the iconic figures in one way or the other. Women also have a complex relationship to that figure. Some things they will follow, some things they will reject. A whole set of, but there are relations to the figure which emerges on the figure on the screen. So I think these changes are related to changing ways in which women occupy the public space. And I don't know whether to say that there's only oppression in this process. Because you have to account for the fact that there is desire, even on the part of women, to be attractive. There's a willingness to conform to that norm on the part of women. Otherwise, why would you have face whitening creams as one of the predominant factors in advertisements on television? So many of them. Fairness creams. So many of them. Obviously, at some level, it should make a difference. Though we can't measure exactly how it does. It should make a difference. Otherwise, people would not spend so much money. And every girl next door you see is trying out this face whitening cream. So there is an acceptance, there is a desire. At the same time, there's an oppression. And the challenge, I think, for a feminist politics or for a democratic politics which is trying to understand women as different from the strictly gender role model you have, the challenge is to be able to work with that desire among women and yet go beyond it in a way which empowers them without binding them with demands which they cannot keep in terms of what they would like to do. And that is a primary aspect.